Welcome, everyone. I'm Anodea Judith, and I am really delighted today to be speaking with my longtime brother, comrade, um, just co-creator, Oberon Zell, who has a story in my brand new goddess book called Goddess: Blessed Reunions with the Feminine Face of the Divine. And in that book, in the middle section, people have been invited to submit their personal stories of their encounters with the goddess. And Oberon did submit one. And I think you are actually the only man that submitted, although I invited many men, but they didn't write it. But to have a story in the book. And so we're just going to talk. We've known each other, we just realized, for 47 years, since certainly before I got pregnant with my son, and he's 42. So we've known each other quite a while. We were involved in the Church of All Worlds together for many decades and have served the goddess in so many different ways. So I want to welcome you. Oberon he's really one of the pioneers of the goddess resurgence in the pagan community. He founded the Grey School of Wizardry, which from the Harry Potter films, what if we had a real Hogwarts, right? That was your idea. He's written Grimoire for the Apprentice Wizard, wonderful book, Gaia Genesis, which I hope we get into the ideas of. And your most recent book, Oberon, why don't you hold it up? History's Mysteries.
There we go.
There you go.
Just out. History's Mysteries. Turning points that changed our world.
Oh, that's what I want to talk about today.
Oh, it's a lot of fun. Lots and lots of illustrations, maps, all kinds of cool stuff.
Oh, I want a copy of that right away.
Good.
Well, so we
Everybody
talk
does.
about the goddess today.
All right.
And so we have both worshiped the goddess for our whole lives. And I want to ask you, how did the goddess first come into your life, and what difference did that make to your life?
Well, that's very profound because there's just so many levels. But I think my first encounter with the goddess was as a child. My very first reading as a child, because I was a very early reader, was children's versions of the Greek myths. So I first encountered the goddesses in the stories, the Greek mythology. And I totally thought that was wonderful. And I fell in love with her. And I was always into nature as a child. And at the time I was born, which was 1942, my father was off in the South Pacific fighting the Japanese. And so for the several years until the war was over, I was raised by the triple goddess, the mother, my maiden aunt, who never married, and my grandmother, the crone. And so my very earliest experience of real life was the triple goddess. And I spent a lot of time out in nature, whatever woods or swamps or fields or meadows were around, I spent my time out there. That was my early childhood. And I retained all of that. I continued to pursue those interests, everything pertaining to the feminine, anything. And it seemed natural as the masculine to be drawn to the feminine. I loved everything female and feminine, nature, the goddess, women. My mother was remarkably indulgent. I mean, at one point I had a screech owl and a bat and a rat and several terrariums and aquariums all in my room. I never really questioned that, the natural draw that I had to all things feminine. And that's always been the case. In fact, much, much later, when I started reading books about the goddess specifically, they were by men, like Robert Graves, White Goddess, and and various other authors at the time. They were all men. I don't recall any women who were writing about the goddess back in the day. It seems to me that it took a while for women to get involved in the goddess. Most of the early attraction and all the books were all by men, Gerald Gardner and Alex Sanders and all of them. Even, in the magical field and anthropology and archaeology, it was always men.
Yeah, James Millard. Yeah. And that's because men were writing most of the books back then.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. They were. So that was what reintroduced me.
Well, it's interesting that you stumbled upon the stories at a young age. For me, it was a little older, but it was, I was brought up in a Christian family. God was a he. All the priests were male. I was part of mankind. And I took that as, a given until the ninth grade. I took an ancient history class and we read Edith Hamilton's mythology.
Mm-hmm.
Then all of a sudden I said there were gods and goddesses. There was much more than I have been told. And it absolutely revolutionized my thinking at the time. And from then on, I was just hungry to learn more about our ancient history, to learn more about what was, and to bring it back into this life.
Well, that's pretty much as it was for me. I mean, right. Well, I was reading the mythology and about goddesses and plurality and pantheons, and polytheism long before I was old enough to go to Sunday school and read the Bible stories. And by that time, I just regarded the stories of in the Bible as another cultural mythology that was not my own. I mean, this was Jewish mythology, and I wasn't Jewish, I wasn't Greek, I wasn't Egyptian, but I enjoyed all the mythologies. But it never occurred to me that one of them was true in some sense and the others were false. That never occurred to me. So, I was, I suppose I was preconditioned before I encountered Christianity, but you grew up in Christianity, so that's a little different.
Yeah. And then it shifted. So what do you think would be different today if the goddess religions had not been destroyed back in the day? If the whole classical period, the temples destroyed, the statues beheaded, the literature suppressed, the priestesses killed, the witches burned. I mean, we know the history. And what would be different today, or what do you think that did to our world? Because that's a big theme in my book, of
It is.
I talk about, I go into maiden, mother, crone, and queen. I put a fourth category there.
Mm.
And the mother, I talk about what always was, we began with the mother. And then I go to the crone and I talk about the fall of the goddess and how she was destroyed. Then I go to the maiden and talk about the resurgence today. And then the queen, as women are taking their power and becoming queens. So, I think people don't understand. It's been so wiped out from the collective consciousness. Even today, not that many people know about the goddess. It's remarkable that people didn't even know it was missing. And so we've been missing half of the Godhead, half of the deity. We've been missing half of creation, half of the divine. And we are just so used to it this way, people hardly realize what's missing, what we've lost. So maybe you can speak to what got lost with the loss of the goddess and affected today.
Well, we've been motherless children, and it is very weird because the goddess and the feminine, everything is the source. That is the source of it all. I mean, it's inconceivable to read, for example, the biblical account of creation, which makes absolutely no sense at all. That somehow women were born from men. It's like what? It's all weird and twisted. I think that the best analysis that I've seen in this, and I've seen quite a few and read lots and lots of books, some of which you turned me on to, was one that you turned me on to. I think it was called God versus the Gods. It was monotheism versus polytheism.
Yeah.
A brilliant analysis, really. Brilliant. So it's not just the goddess, although that's certainly been there. It's also monotheism versus polytheism, and mono everything versus poly everything. But yeah, that whole mono everything, it just seems really weird because we live in a diverse multiplicity of stuff, a rich ecosystem of possibilities. And to eliminate all those and just narrow down on one tiny little puritanistic focus seems to me to be a kind of insanity. I mean, the rise of monotheism is the core, and the initial aspect of that, which we find in the Hebrews at the time of the Exodus and all, was to eradicate the goddess, to eradicate feminine power specifically. And I think it's an important thing to understand that for the point of view of the patriarchal, monotheistic people, you women scare the shit out of them. Obviously, enough so that they have tried for millennia to try to eradicate women's power, women themselves. I mean, murdering women, burning women at the stake, the hatred directed to women and all things feminine is staggering. And yet
It's
throughout all that.
it's still happening today
It
with the
is.
Roe versus Wade, and women in this country don't have a right over their own body.
Exactly, exactly. But this is the key to understand what they're afraid of is to see where our strength is. Our strength is in restoring the goddess and restoring women's power, bringing that back. This is a thing they are most afraid of. So, let's do it.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, Mother Nature has still continued to be a prevalent motif. Just a couple of weeks ago, the most Christian comic strip in the paper. Here we go. The most Christian comic strip is The Family Circus.
Yes.
Shows. Well, a couple of weeks ago, they showed a little girl, Dolly, coming in from playing in the snow, and she says, "Call me Mother Nature. I made a snowflake."
Wow.
So she didn't say, "Call me God. I made a snowflake."
Yeah.
She said, "Call me Mother Nature." And everybody knows who Mother Nature is. Everywhere in the world, you can talk about Mother Earth, everywhere. Different names for her. Pachamama, is big in the Southern Hemisphere, in the West. So I think that is really profound. We have not entirely forgotten that we have a mother. And everybody knows that. Every baby, knows their mother. They may not know their father, but they do know their mother.
Well, that was part of the control of women's sexuality, because that was the only way you knew who the father was. And then you pass your inheritance down through the patriarchal line. Right. It used to be that way. So that's another aspect of something that we lost. But when you say the mother is Mother Nature, which we all know, and it doesn't take, we used to say in the Church of All Worlds, it's not a religion of beliefs. Do you believe in a tree? Do you believe in a mountain? Do you believe in the ocean? Well, these are tangible. They're obvious. We don't have to believe in it. And we can see the miracle and magic of nature as the mother that spawns everything. And we're trying to rebirth a new age, trying to change the culture and evolve it. We cannot birth something without the feminine.
Well, that's the trick, is shifting the dominant paradigm, which was the goal of the whole process in the Church of All Worlds, to attain the innermost circle. The criteria is to, change the dominant paradigm in some way. And I think introducing the Gaia concept, and spreading that and growing it, and it's become quite widespread now, and in my little, figure of millennial Gaia has become extremely popular. I mean, many, many thousands of these are all over the place, and I think that's influential, which is why I got around to finally writing the book that I had been wanting to write for 50 years about Gaia, the Gaia Genesis book. But it's all here too, the whole story. But we live that. We all live this. And your books and your writing and the work we've done together is all reflective of a way that we are shifting the dominant paradigm.
And one of the operative words there is dominant.
Yes,
dominant paradigm is a paradigm of dominance. And Brian Eisler talks about moving from the dominator model to the partnership model. So it's not about going back to a matriarchy where women have power over men. It's about partnership. It's about raising the women up and bringing the divine down to have an equal status with the masculine. We're not talking about dominating here. Right. We're talking about coming back into unity and partnership, because it's really important to realize the goddess is not God in drag.
No, not at all.
Not Jehovah with a skirt.
Right.
And to say, well, women can become priests, women can become rabbis. Well, that's great if that's what they want. But being a priestess is not the same thing at all.
No, it isn't.
One of the reasons I wrote this book now, even though there were a lot of goddess books written 40 years ago, is that, then it was women's liberation. How do women, have the same rights as men and the same privileges? And how do we go become CEOs? And how do we get into the workplace? But all of that was really women becoming more like men, having the privileges of men. But women realized they were being masculinized in order to do that. And one of the reasons I wrote my She Rises archetype deck is because women archetypes of leadership are different than men. Women lead in a different way. And so women have had liberation, but we have not brought the feminine values into the discussion of values in our world. And
Right.
it's not really just about liberating women. That still has a long way to go. But it's about bringing the contribution that the feminine makes, which to me is beauty, is love, is pageantry, is diversity, is the love of nature, and the sense that everything is connected.
Right. That's the big one.
Everything is connected. And so we talk about oneness, and there's oneness and there's diversity. And the diversity has an interconnected oneness, but you don't want to deny the diversity to have the oneness. And my metaphor for that is like an orchestra. An orchestra is playing one concerto, right? But you don't want the flutes to sound like the violins, and you don't want the bass to sound like the horns. The diversity of that is what makes it rich, and yet they're playing one symphony. What I think that the patriarchal and Abrahamic religions denied was that diversity, and now we're not playing with a full deck anymore.
True, true. No, that I think is really important. There is a phrase that I think is the essence of the wisdom of the ages that was articulated in Latin by Cicero over 2,000 years ago, and it's the motto of the Grey School of Wizardry, and I think it's just the most important ever. And it is this: Omnia vivunt, omnia inter se connexa. Everything is alive, everything is interconnected. Religion, the word means relinking, reconnecting. That's what it's supposed to be. These days, I hear all people all the time saying, well, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual. But I'm not particularly spiritual, but I'm deeply religious. I'm all about the connection. I'm all about the community. But what we need is a religious transformation, something much bigger than mere spirituality. So that's what I work for. But I think you talked about what's missing. And that's it. It's that connection. We have lost that sense of connection. Everybody is alienated, isolated, alone. This is the psychological anomie of our entire civilization.
We're living more in the man-made world.
Yes.
Of technology and buildings and houses and trains and cars and skyscrapers and cities, and we've moved more away from being in the world of nature. And so people that grow up in that and have never seen a redwood tree, they don't relate to what it means to cut down all the redwood forests. They have never walked in that majesty. So when we're out of touch with it, we don't have the sense of saving it. And so I feel the environment is one of the biggest losses that has come from the suppression of the goddess religion, and the incredible environmental crises that we are facing now is, I think, a direct descendant of the suppression of the goddess's mother, the goddess's nature, and the body as holy. A lot of the Christian religions made the body a sinful place to be. We had to get out of the body. Spiritual is, a lot of people think spiritual is being way up here and being disconnected from the body.
Right.
I think matter and nature and the creation is the most amazing miracle. The divine is there, that we see all around us with its beauty, and just the way, the trees shed their leaves and turn into mulch for the roots. And, the snow is white in the winter at the darkest time, and the trees lose their leaves so the sun shines through them when we need the light. I mean, and snow in the mountains that turns into the streams that come down in the spring. I mean, the whole thing is so divinely orchestrated. To say that there's some kind of evil or less consciousness in nature is, to me, completely misguided.
Well, I could not possibly agree with you more. And I think this is one of the great gifts that paganism has to offer. In all of its diversity, there is one common thread that is run through, and that is the seasonal celebrations that we call the Wheel of the Year. And the celebration cycle in paganism is not based on the life or death of some prophet or some great event in history. It's the recurrent cycle of the year, of the turning of the seasons, and celebrating the solstices, the equinoxes, and the cross-quarter days between them links us with all other people and all other cultures in the world today and throughout history. She's not just the mother of me, she's the mother of us all. She's
That's
the
right.
mother of all mothers,
That's right.
That kind of stuff. And that makes us all kin. We're all brothers and sisters. We, conflicts with other people, making war or doing awful things to other people, that's doing it to ourselves. You know, this is bad. That's as stupid as cutting off our own foot. If we understand that we are part of all this, that we are cells in this great living body of the entire earth, but really just on the material level, physically, biologically, chemically, we are all one organism. And when we recognize that, I think it'll make a huge difference having that kind of a paradigm instead of the paradigm of that we are the chosen people and everybody else is other and therefore they're bad because, you know, if we're right and there's only one true right and only way, then everybody else is wrong.
And we have the right to wipe them out because they're other. And
exactly.
they're us. Exactly. Everything is carrying an important piece. Yeah.
Everything is alive. Everything is interconnected.
You know, a lot of people think of the goddess religion as something just for women, you know, and a lot of men don't pay attention to it. They think, oh, that's just women's stuff. You know, I even know that my, you know, book is largely going to be read by women just because of the title. But there's a lot in it for men to have a religion that has the goddess. So why don't you talk about that as a man?
Well, yeah, to me, relating to the goddess is like, you know, relating to women. You know, I love women. I do deeply. I've been married my entire adult life, except for the last 10 years after Morning Glory died, you know, and now I'm getting remarried again at 81. Because, you know, to me, to have that relationship, that connection, that, you know, priest to priestess, man to woman, God to goddess relationship is crucial. Without that, you're only half a person. You're not complete, you know. And so to me, the just the natural draw as a man to women it's about love. It's like being in love. It's like falling in love. It's like all of vertebrate life, well, invertebrate life, all the way back to the Cambrian explosion, you know, involves male and female coming together. There's that draw, not to be separate, but to come together in unity. And I just feel that on every level, not just physical, but spiritual as well. And I always have. It seems natural.
And I think really there's a lot in it for men to be with women who know who they are, to be women that are in their feminine, to be women that celebrate their sexuality, to be women that earn their own money and have independence. That frees men up. So speaking of connections and stories, maybe you can briefly tell in your own words the story you have in the book about your Gaia vision. You had the whole vision that, you know, birthed your Gaia Genesis.
That was the most profound epiphany of my entire life, really. It was tremendous. And the situation was, it was over 70 years ago, 1970. That was the year of the first Earth Day, you know, and it was preceded by a total eclipse of the sun. And it was upon which occasion I did my first experience with LSD. And I had a fascination throughout my life in evolution, spurred by my discovery of dinosaurs as a kid, you know. So the concept of evolution I was deeply aware of, you know, everything involved. And it had a starting point, you know, it had a beginning point, the evolution of life on Earth. So anyway, I was filled with this stuff. I had just discovered all the stuff about the goddess and goddesses and seen all the beautiful pictures in Eric Newman's book and read the poetry in Robert Graves. And of course, I'd read his stories of the Greek myths in school as a kid. I mean, they taught you that stuff in school. A friend of mine, they invited me over, me and Julie, who was the woman I was with at the time. They had a big trampoline in the backyard, and we thought it would be really cool to go out and lay around naked on the trampoline and look at the stars. And so there we were, lying on our back, looking up at the stars, and I started to tell her the stories of how they connect. And I would, you know, draw little lines. And when you're tripping, you can see the lines. They stay there. It's called trails, you know. So I was drawing lines to connect the dots to outline the constellations. And I started playing with my fingers and the auras. And I got into doing the Star Trek live long and prosper thing, you know. And I noticed that as my fingers moved apart, the auras kind of, you know, separated slowly and then finally disconnected. And it was like watching the mitosis of a cell, of cell division. And I had this flash about that, about cell division. And somewhere in there, I went back down through it. I said, well, I began my life, you know, with the joining of a cell from my mother and father into a single cell, the zygote. And that divided and subdivided and multiplied into the 30 odd trillion cells of, of a human body. But I'm still one single organism, despite the fact that I started from a single cell and became trillions of cells and organs and systems. I still retain that single consciousness, that single identity as a single being. Well, I went back then. I just got catapulted down through the river of DNA all the way back to the very beginning, back to the Cambrian explosion, to the very first cell, and the very first division that occurred, because all life has come from that. All of our DNA, the protoplasm, we are all one continuum, all the same DNA, all the same protoplasm that we share with all other multicellular life on the planet, all of it. And therefore, it becomes clear that all of life on the planet is a single organism. And I'm going back in this vision, back into time, back to the very beginning, and I'm laying there, looking up at the stars, and kind of felt myself rising up above the earth into the stars, and then looking back upon the earth beneath me. And as I'm doing so, I see the emergence of life and see it spreading across the world like the Genesis wave in Star Trek. And I had this vision, and as I'm looking down and I'm having this thought that this is all one creature. I'm seeing that evolution is embryology. It's the embryology of a single being. And I'm just totally tripping out about this. And at that point in my vision, she opens her eyes and she looks up at me and smiles and says, "Now you know me." And tears squirted from my eyes, and if I'd been standing, I would have fallen to my knees, but I was actually lying on my back. But it was that experience. And the only response I could make was, "I shall ever serve you." Mm-hmm. And since that moment, I've been on Her Majesty's sacred service. There was simply nothing else I could do. Everything I've done from that moment has been in her service.
Brings tears to my eyes to hear this story, and I've heard it many times before. This has been a beautiful conversation. We've both been servants of the goddess for our whole life. You were there and part of my ordination in 1985 in the Church of All Worlds, where I swore myself to her service above and beyond all else. And when this invitation to write the goddess book came from the Common Sentience or Sacred Stories Publishing, I thought, well, of course, I have to bring this full circle and bring this around. So I think I'm here to carry a torch into a new renaissance of the goddess that is another wave from the wave that started way back in the 70s when we met. And now it's another wave coming, and we're both doing the work. So it really is fun to talk with you. We always have had such a good time doing that. We could go on for hours, but I know listeners have busy lives. So I'm going to thank you, Oberon, and look forward to giving you a copy of the book when it's out at spring equinox. Maybe you can forward it around, and love you much.
Love you too, Anodea, my sister.